Okay, we're we're fixing to listen to this real quick. It's extremely sad. And if the truth be known, they're probably still off with their numbers. At first, it started out about 1,000 people dead. Now they've upped the death toll to about 1,300. But I'd like for you to look at this in regards towards mammoth global deluges and mammoth global droughting that is devastating this planet Earth in ways that meteorologists and scientists and historians has never seen before, towards things being out of order pertaining to the natural elements of nature lashing out the way that it is right now. And of course, all this is a fulfillment of the Bible, towards Christ saying that in the last days that great, humongous sorrows would fall upon the humanity towards the woes to the inhabitants here upon to the earth. And whenever it speaks about those things, it's not speaking about those things because God himself are doing those things, but it speaks about those things as a prelude of things that's going to come into the future in regards towards a prophecy in the effect towards trying to warn people or give out advisories to people that these are the occurrences that you can start to look forward to in the last days, proving that yes, we are at the doors, even as Jesus said that when you shall see these things, know that your redemption draweth nigh. We know as true born again believing Christians who and what preserves our redemption, which is the holy eternal Son, Jesus Christ of Nazareth. Though we may not be perfect, though we may make silly fleshly mistakes, we still know who our Redeemer is, that sitteth upon the right hand of God, that maketh intercession for us. For if we sin, we have an advocate with the Father. Because up until Jesus Christ come, you had to go before a priest or a rabbi, and your sins was not forgiven, but they was only atoned from year to year to year. And that was the whole primary principles of the Feast of Tabernacles, the days of unleavened bread, all the other traditional traditions that they practiced in the Old Testament. That was a form of sacrifice and obedience, of recompensing their wrongs and their failures to the Creator. Since Christ has come into the world, and since him being the only remaining living Savior, risen living Savior that sits on the right hand of the Father, we know that in him, by him, and through him is the only way that we can preserve, or the only way that we can prosper, or the only way that we can survive, because without him we are absolutely nothing. These unbearable global phenomenon occurrences continue to keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger and more horrendous, as the Bible talks about each and every time, just like a woman travailing with a child. A woman travailing with a child, not only her compound birth pains get closer together, but they also intensify with pain. That's what we're seeing right now on the planet, here in this galaxy, in this universe called Mother Earth. And the only way to straighten it out is for people to go back to the altar and to get their first works, do their first works over again, and allow for the Holy Spirit to teach us and guide us towards what we either should do or shouldn't do towards not only the harm that we're doing to the planet, but the harm that we're doing to each other. Please listen.
The flooding crisis in Pakistan grows worse by the hour. More than 1,300 people have been killed, including more than 450 children so far. About 33 million people are impacted overall. It's all due to record rainfall and melting glaciers in the country's northern mountains. The UN and Pakistan's government have both blamed climate change for the crisis, and this morning the Prime Minister got an aerial view before visiting a relief camp in his country's hardest hit province. The UN and Pakistan are asking for $160 million in emergency funding, and the UN Secretary General.
$160 million is only a drop in the bucket compared to a devastation like that. They need more like $160 billion. They don't need no $160 million, which I realize that it don't take as much to get those people up and going, because basically they all live in huts and they're all pre-adapted to Mother Nature as far as not having air conditioning and heating and etc. But I mean, that is a large portion of real estate that has been devastated by this flood. And I may be off in my statistics. Maybe instead of 160 million, maybe more like 800 million would take care of it. But the fact of the matter is, that is a harsh thing to think that those people right now are living through this. And listen to what this individual has to say about this.
We'll visit the region later this week. More extreme weather here in the U.S.
Well, I didn't catch it. I must have got it on the front end and didn't make it. But anyways, what they was talking about, the people in general right now are without food and supplies for basically a week since that occurrence occurred. And within 2 to 3 weeks from now, people will basically go to dropping like flies as far as starvation. I don't know what they're drinking, but if they're drinking that water that has fallen in all that mud and murk and everything else, it's probably contaminated, and that in and of itself will give out cholera and all kinds of different diseases. So these people that they just got through seeing over in Afghanistan really needs more than just prayers. They need some assistance and some help. Now let's watch what's going on in other parts of the country, please.
In the U.S. this holiday weekend, more than 80 million people are under flood watches today from Alabama to Maine.
From Alabama to Maine. Now keep in mind, last week, about 10 days ago, the state of Texas had done without rain for something like a consistently of 100 days. And I don't forgot now how many days that they hit towards being over 100. It was just day after day after day after day, to the extent that a lot of your farmers out west was actually selling off the herds of their cattle because they knew that they wasn't going to have good, adequate hay supply this winter, and it was going to cost them an arm and a leg just to be able to feed their livestock. So rather than take a chance on that, they went ahead and sold their livestock. Now, since then, they have gotten a humongous all-time breaking rain in Dallas and the Dallas-Fort Worth area that I guess moved over into Jackson, Mississippi, the capital of Jackson, Mississippi, that basically flooded Jackson, Mississippi again, and their water had become contaminated to the point that the governor was begging for some sort of relief pertaining to water because they couldn't drink none of their water because their water supply had become contaminated. Just as of the day before yesterday, I was coming over the Tennessee River on a ferry, and I noticed that the cloud level had dropped significantly and got real dark. And by the time, just about the time we got to the other side of the bank, whenever they dropped us off, which would be on the, we went from the Stewart County side, Stewart and Humphrey County side, over towards Springville Pump House, and over in Benton County and Henry County is where they dropped me off at. But the bottom just fell out, and I'm telling you, within an hour's time, they had to have gotten at least 3 to 5 inches of rain, the way that it rained. A matter of fact, whenever I was over in that territory yesterday, because that's one of the reasons why that I wanted to go up and check on the Humphrey County people and see basically what all that they had established in regards towards the great flood that they had received last year there in Humphrey County, Waverly, Tennessee. I wanted to go and see if they had accomplished basically anything, and while I was up that way, they had accomplished a few things. There was a few things that looks like that they had rebuilt or in the process of rebuilding. But I went on up after getting testimony about how that the railroad basically was being used as a levee because of all the water, and then the railroad gave in and it busted out that railroad that caused an usher amount of water to come down to Waverly, Tennessee. But in reality, Waverly, Tennessee did not get but what they're talking about, pertaining to about 15 to 17 inches of rain in about a 6-7 hour period. But if you go on up from Waverly, Tennessee to McErwin, zip code 37101, I think is the zip code. Anyways, I picked this card up yesterday, or day before yesterday, at Picking on Main, 136 Main Street. Melissa or Butch McBride, owners to this particular facility, and I actually bought a picture from them that I kind of liked, with me being over here in the Reelfoot, Tennessee area, that I found to be pretty attractive. Trophy fishing that I thought would look good on somebody's wall, especially mine, with it being priced as cheap as what it was. But I got to talking to that individual for a pretty long, lengthy time, and I found out that they're just north of that town, up by the golf cart. There's a golf course up there, a fairly nice one, that they registered in their gauge 23 3/4 inch of rain in that period of time that fell within that same time frame. Of course, the way that the weather meteorologist measures it, they measure it in a 24-hour period. But then there was another individual that this individual talked to that had a electronical digital measuring gauge, and I don't know the difference between the standard and the digital ones, but they're supposed to be much more accurate. And according to that individual that gave his report, he registered 24 inches and a quarter inches of rain that fell up by the McErwin, EWEN, McErwin, Tennessee area, that fell, that basically caused the great damage it hit down by Waverly, Tennessee, that absolutely just knocked them off of their feet. And, you know, part of it was the fact that the railroad gave way because the railroad was acting like a levee, and the other part was that below Waverly, they had a bridge down there that there was so much debris that that the bridge couldn't release the water the volume of the water, because all the debris had backed up the bridge to the point that it basically knocked the bridge off its foundation. And even to this day, they still ain't fixed the bridge yet. But that bridge is basically where the water volume is supposed to go through and then go back into like a creek bed, and from there it's supposed to drain on out into the Tennessee River. Well, it slowed down before it ever got to the Tennessee River, and it backed up, and that's what caused all the major flooding in Waverly, Tennessee. But I'm just saying that happened last year. I think it was August sometime within about 2 or 3 weeks ago, that killed over 20 plus people. I don't forget now, several children, but it was a horrendous scene, similar towards what has recently happened within the past 4 to 6 weeks over in eastern Kentucky. And of course, we've seen major flooding in 2 or 3 other areas that these deluges just come out of the ground.
After days of torrential downpour, flash flooding in northern Georgia is being described as a once in a 200-year event by local officials. For a third of the country out on the West Coast, temperatures continue to reach record levels. In California, punishing triple-digit heat is now fueling fires across the state, and the heat is not expected to break for days. Let's start with NBC's Steve Patterson in California.
Yeah, the dangers of this heat wave in effect now, expected to continue into the week, and right now fueling 2 of the worst wildfires that we have in the state. They're happening in Northern California, right next to the Oregon border. 2 fires burning in the same county. One is the Mill Fire, the other the Mountain Fire. The Mill Fire sparking Friday, spreading very quickly, doubling in size, now 4,200 acres. 2 people found dead in that fire, and the wreckage left over that fire, carried by high winds, spreading across bone-dry vegetation, but through a neighborhood. So home after home just torched, more than 100 structures estimated to be lost in that fire. The fire now 40% contained, so that's some good news, but firefighters dealing with that second fire, the Mountain Fire, very nearby, just a few miles north, now close to 9,000 acres. That fire only 10% contained, much larger, but in a much more rural area, so firefighters hoping to keep that away from homes. Meanwhile, all of that fueled by this incredible heat wave that we're in. Weather historians estimate this may be one of the worst heat waves the West has ever seen. 100-degree temperatures expected to stretch onto Thursday or Friday. 110 to 115 if you go to Central Valley, California, where our country's food is produced. Farm workers having to get out of the heat. Crews in the city having to get out of the heat. But the biggest worry right now is grid operators worrying about the stress on the power grid. By Tuesday, we could see 50,000 megawatts of energy used. That's an incredible amount. If that amount is surpassed, it could mean that there's more demand than there is energy supply. To mitigate this, they're asking people to follow what they call flex alerts. So during the afternoon, about 4 to 9 p.m., telling people to conserve as much energy as possible, raise the thermostat a little bit, don't use appliances if you don't have to, all in an effort to try to keep that energy usage a little bit lower, so we're not into a situation where energy managers have to go into rolling blackouts, the likes of which we haven't seen since 2020. If that happened, it would be another even more dangerous situation here in California.
And the reason why it's so much dangerous is because you got so many people out there now that are dependent upon life-challenging medical procedures. Some of them is on oxygen, some of them are on other types of medical things, and not everybody can afford a generator, and whenever the electricity goes out, it can actually cause death and injury to people. In addition to the degree that a lot of people that does have generators don't know how to operate the generator, and they put it too close to the house, and the next thing you know, the house gets filled full of carbon dioxide, and the next thing you know, people go to dying of carbon dioxide. So one problem exhilarates or exacerbates another problem that can create multiple problems. Now keep in mind that the day before Christmas in Denver, Colorado last year, there was some extreme weather pattern over there that got extremely, extremely dry and hot for that time of year. and something caught a fire, and it just went from one neighborhood to another neighborhood, from one street to another street, and before it was all said and done with, it burnt like 1,000 structures. And of course, the only thing that put it out was a major blizzard that come in right on top of that fire that basically put all the fires out. But if it wasn't for the blizzard, God only knows how many more structures that it would had burnt down to the ground. And of course, it hadn't been, but I don't know if it was last year or the year before. I'd have to look at the charts pertaining to how that the heat expanded up towards where they're talking about, up towards Oregon and Washington State, that went all the way up towards Canada. And there was temperatures in Canada for the first time, all-time breaking temperatures that went up into that area. And if I'm not mistaken, there was an event that happened another year or two before then over in Alaska, to where Alaska actually registered something like, I think it was either 75 degrees or 90 degrees. It was an unbelievable amount of temperature that Alaska had received. This is what God has showed me pertaining to these heat domes. I believe that we have done damage to our undergrowth, our not just our undergrowth, but our underneath the feet, going down into going down towards the core or the mantle of the center of the earth, by draining all the oil out of the earth that was put there for a heat shield, and it was also put there so that whenever the platelets rub together, it would help to eliminate some of the friction, which would help to eliminate some of the heat. I think that the oil level has gotten so low that it's basically like a shield, that in spots, depending upon where it's at and whenever it hits, depending upon the centrifugal force of the molten lava, that it generates heat, and heat is coming out of the earth kind of like a bubble, an invisible bubble, that causes this dome. Now, we know for a fact that because the heated atmosphere above the cloud level has gotten so hot, that it's causing irregularities with these extreme deluges and heat domes, to the point that the moisture is going up higher into the atmosphere. It's holding more moisture because of the heat. And then whenever it does release the moisture, it comes down in buckets. Now, I got punished, okay, in the year that I was up in Land Between the Lakes in 2007, and I was trying to forewarn these people that God had showed me about these electrical disturbances that was soon to come. I think, if I'm not mistaken, right before the flood came down in Dallas, Texas, and over in Fort Worth, that state registered a all-time high of the kilowatts that they was having to produce to be able to supply energy to their customer base, because of it being so hot down in Florida. And of course, if you look at what happened to them a couple years ago pertaining to the ice that went down into the lower parts of Texas, that basically caused about 1,000 people to die, either over freezing to death or carbon dioxide or whatever. Basically, their whole system shut down in the form of a major electrical disturbance, and stayed shut down for several days before they finally up and got it going again. Just like the deal over in Jackson, Mississippi, pertaining to their water problems. That has been going on now for several days. Several days towards people not being able to allowed to drink their water. Now, if they've got some of them tablets that's supposed to purify the water, and if they can boil the water, and if they want to take a chance on the odor, they can always put like 1 teaspoon of Clorox bleach in a gallon of water, or maybe not quite a teaspoon, maybe a half a tablespoon or something like that. But anyways, there's ways that you can purify the water if you can get the water. But the way I understand it, that their sub pump broke completely down to the point that they lost all water pressure. There's a place just right up here in Kentucky that recently had their water pressure, their water level went low to the point that the Army had to go in there and supply bottles of water. So you may be asking, what's happening? What's going on here? What's going on here is the very thing that Jesus Christ tried to give out advisories and warnings to, pertaining to these end time events that are only increasing and getting more intense every day, because yes, we are at the doors. And if we do not soon recognize this, and if we don't go back to the cross to doing our works over again, just like the first 3 or 4 chapters of Revelations talks about, if we think that things is bad now, whenever God gets tired of it, because what's going on right now is the work of the devil and the work of man, pertaining to our ignorances towards what we have done to ourselves and what we have done to Mother Earth. But if we think that it's bad right now, whenever God comes back in flaming fire and throws this thing off into great tribulation, you ain't seen hard times. You ain't seen extreme weather events or irregularities pertaining to Mother Nature. These things is all coming down the pike, just exactly how Jesus Christ gave out warnings and advisories towards trying to prepare his people before the end of the end time. We're in the end time. It's just a matter of time before Gabriel blows the trumpet. The dead in Christ shall rise first, and those who are alive and remain shall be caught up to be with the Lord Jesus Christ in the air. In the air. In the air. For our bodies will be transfigurated from mortal to immortal in the twinkling of an eye, and we will basically vanish or disappear, those that are alive, and we will go up into the heavens. Now, I believe, pertaining to the second seal not being opened yet, that during the time that all these people are going to be killing the Christians, towards thinking that they're going to be doing their God a favor by getting rid of us in this great purging, that there will be massive bodies all over the world where the non-Christians took out the Christians. This will be the hour of temptation that shall fall upon all the world to try them that dwell here upon to the earth. It talks about that. Not just part of the earth, but the whole earth that dwells here upon to the earth. How come people can't understand that? It's still, it's bewildering to me. And how come people can't see that these power outages pertaining to the blackouts, the brownouts, and all the other electrical outs was the very thing that I got punished for in the year 20 and 17, 20 and 19, and then 20 and 13 up in the state of Western Kentucky, pertaining to what was going on in Land Between the Lakes, known as LBL. I was up there fasting and praying for a mighty revival, because God had showed me of these occurrences that was coming down the pike. And instead of me getting helped, or instead of me getting supporters, instead of me gaining some sort of a congregation, I actually got thrown under the bus. Not once, not twice, but throughout the period of 30 some odd years, I can count at least a dozen plus times that I have illegitimately either been arrested or illegitimately been put into some sort of insane asylum by thinking that I was out of touch with reality, just as the officials tried to blame me towards in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, whenever I was out there doing what I was doing in investigating the Oklahoma bombing pertaining to Timothy McVeigh and Nichols. That once more I got punished for. They destroyed the back end of my camper. The city of Oklahoma said that they wasn't going to pay for it. Their law enforcement tried to pin something on me that I had to fight to keep from it being pinned on me. And finally, they acknowledged and throwed it out of their system, but they never went back and changed the format pertaining to all their media in Oklahoma. That to this day, I guess it still says that I threatened a police officer in Oklahoma, even though me and this particular police officer gained some sort of a relationship. His name was Lieutenant Barnes. He worked for the United States Marshal. I'm sure you can look him up. He's also in a principality in a surrounding town over there. I think he lives in Edmond, but in the surrounding town, he works as a chairman in the city board. Mr. Burns. I don't know his last name, but I know that he for sure he couldn't be that difficult to look up, with him being a retired United States Marshal, and now he works for the council pertaining to one of the cities that surrounds Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. But once more, what's your point, Dennis? My point is that I've tried to help the Homo sapiens. I really have, more than once, and every time I put forth a good foot, it backfired. It backfired, beginning towards what occurred in 1983 in Kenton, Tennessee, just because I was talking about the very events that I'm talking about right now, that basically people thought that I was out of my mind, that I was crazier than I guess you know what in a you know what, and they basically put me in Bolivar thinking that there was something wrong with me because I was talking about the Antichrist, the end time events pertaining to the four horsemen and the seals and etc. Yeah, that's what's happened in my life.
Steve, thanks. Let's turn now to NBC's George Solis in Somerville, Georgia, with that flooding. What's the latest where you are?
Yeah, Lindsay, well, waters receded some hours ago, but now we're really starting to see the impact of what it has done to this community. You might be able to see a line of cars here collecting water. That's because a lot of people now either don't have water, have low water pressure, and because everyone here is under a boil water advisory. Those waters rushing and rising, that it inundated the water plant here. So officials here still trying to figure out when they might be able to get the water systems back online. And we do know, based on other flooding events, that sometimes it could take 2 to 3 days, sometimes it could take longer. We've heard reports of...
Now, just within the past couple weeks, I have noticed TVA around here dropping off some sort of extensions on a lot of their high voltage line towers. I asked somebody about it that lived over in the Kenton area, that lived down in the bottom target area, that why was they doing that, and their explanation was, according to them, TVA had explained to them that they was adding an extension onto these towers that was in these low-lying areas because they didn't want the towers to get completely submerged underwater to the degree that it would basically shut down the electric grid system. Because whenever you look at those high voltage big line towers, they're probably about 40-50 foot high, and why they want to put an extension down in the bottom areas tells me that they haven't ruled out the fact that the waters could actually get above some of those towers if it was to come a major deluge. So rather than take a risk, they're going ahead and remodifying some of the towers that's in the low-lying areas towards bringing them up another 20 foot or so. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if they're going to add more lines to the towers. I don't know what's going on with that, but I've seen all these signs suddenly coming up all over the place, and I've seen these extension type towers that's laying beside a tower that's brand new versus one that's old, and you can tell the difference by the way it shines. It looks a whole lot more newer, shinier, and that was the explanation that I got. Now, whether or not that explanation is true or not, I don't know. I just know that TVA has been working extensively for the past year or so towards doing things that I don't remember them ever doing, as long as I can remember being supplied by TVA Energy Supply. I don't remember some of the things that they're involved in doing right now that I don't, to me it's unprecedented.
Reports of people saying as they turn on their faucets, they're seeing brown sludge. And that's part of the criticism here from some of the residents I've been speaking with. They're saying that the infrastructure is not where it needs to be. And some wonder if maybe some of this could have been avoided. Of course, we do know that so much water fell at in such a short period of time, that 1 in 200 year type flooding event. So obviously there's only so much that could have been done. We walked into a number of businesses here today just to kind of get a sense of how high the water got. And one business not too far from here, the water easily 2 to 3 feet. The business owner telling me that all of her goods inside of this boutique completely submerged. So we're also talking about losses in the hundreds of thousands. And because the area here is so saturated, some foundations, some homes, some people may not even be fully aware of the total structural damage to their property. So to that end, that state of emergency is obviously going to help once people start to file those claims. But for now, what we have seen is this rush of community support here. This is just
But it ain't going to do a bit of good if you don't have flood insurance. Now this, to me, is where you need to have flood insurance. But the event that happened down on the coast pertaining to a 200 plus mile an hour winds that grabbed up a tidal wave, a 30-foot tidal wave that slammed it against the coastlining areas down there in Mississippi whenever Katrina hit, to me, that should have been covered under regular damages, because it was the 200 mile an hour winds that caused that tidal wave, or that tsunami that come up over there and done the damage that they done. The insurance companies is getting to the point that you got to haggle with them, and you almost got to sue them pertaining to the dotted line towards what you're actually covered for and what's going on here, because I guarantee you they're going to try to squander out of every dime that they can towards saving it either for themselves or saving it for the next catastrophe that may come down the road. So my advice to be anybody in a halfway low-lying area that even is remotely close, if you can afford to get flood insurance, even if it's just like half the value of what your contents would cost and what the lower part of that it would cost to redo your home with taking out sheetrock and carpet and etc. My advice would be to go and get flood insurance, because we're seeing more and more of this happening, not just here in America, but all over the planet.
a local firehouse.
There's characteristics. There's a pattern here, and the pattern is getting worse. Not easing up, not lightening up, but it's getting worse.
So this water giveaway,
Right now, those people out there in California would be begging for a strong rain to come in a way. But then again, there's problems there too, because if you burn off all the foliage, and the foliage dies, the roots die up underneath the ground, and then whenever it does come a hard rain, a lot of those hills and hollers give way, and the next thing you know, you got mudslides. So once more, one problem exacerbates another problem, and that's where we are right now pertaining to the great sorrows, the humongous bad sorrows that is befallen upon humanity.
lasting all day. It is started in the morning and it's scheduled to go through the night. You can see people just coming and going, and people are going to need this because, again, right now they don't have water, and they're under that boil water advisory. We also talked to some business owners who would say, look, today is Labor Day, right? So we would be trying to sell to customers, and they can't because they simply just don't have the authority to open because of the public health considerations. Talked to a young woman earlier today who was telling me she's never seen flooding like this. She was describing as items were seen floating on the street, from fridges to dumpsters from local restaurants. So this really seemed to have taken a lot of people by surprise in this region. And now some are concerned that more flooding events like this could be happening, like they've seen across the country. They're saying, we didn't think it could happen like this here in our neck of the woods, but now they are seeing this with more prevalency, and they are seeing these flooding events happen with much more intensity. I want you to take a listen to what some people told me.
I grew up pretty much in this town. Probably the first time I've actually seen it flood like it did yesterday.
What does that tell you?
I think some people might have been unprepared for it. You know, not just normal civilians, but the county and city themselves. I get it, things happen. To me, I think the drainage system wasn't all there prepared for what was going to happen.
It was a lot, so I'm sure y'all seen pictures. Have we seen pictures? Okay, yeah. So mostly affected, I guess, would be right down the street. So dirt, and then the market got affected pretty badly. Our communities come together to help them. They lost a good amount of products, all kinds of things down there.
Well, walk me through what you saw on the street. So water got pretty high from what I understand.
Yes.
It impacted this really popular business.
Mm-hmm.
What did you see?
It was, so the water was probably about, some places to your hip.
Again, one of the things that really amazes us as we cover these stories about these floodings, and again, they are happening with more prevalency, is how quickly the community comes together. People whose businesses were not affected, those that were on higher elevations, helping their fellow neighbor right now clean up. And again, we saw some businesses that were completely inundated with mud and muck. One woman telling me her loss is definitely going to be in the hundreds of thousands. She wonders if she'll be able to recover. And again, this is after she says, we've seen flooding before, it wasn't so bad, and now this event really catching people off guard. And this water event here, people getting water for their businesses and homes, this is as good as supplies last. So they're hoping that as soon as government steps in, there might be more water giveaways. Hopefully it doesn't have to go that long. So people here also contending with the heat. Obviously not nearly as bad as it is out west, but that's another factor. But the key thing here is now people are definitely paying attention to the weather. They say, look, you see a little bit of rain now, and we are second guessing our preparations. People here now no longer taking anything for granted. But
My advice would be any town in any state in this country or throughout the world that has a low-lying area to where their clean water system is solely relied upon to what they add to their water as far as chlorine and keeping it checked. In other words, if they have a facility that's already like no more than on the ground, that it's under the ground, then they need to cap it off with a mouth. And I know it's going to cost some money to do that, but they need to cap it off with a mouth and go up however far that they need to go up. That way, if it does flood, it won't contaminate their water supply as bad. Most people's water supply, the supply itself is in the upper tanks. It's usually 50, 60 foot above the air, and they've got 4 legs on it that keeps it balanced. But the undertaking of cleaning the water that you can pump up into that big tank is usually on the ground, and it's usually controlled by various people that check routinely the water of the pH level, kind of like checking your swimming pool, and there are certain guidelines where that water should be versus where it shouldn't be. And of course they are in constant check towards tuning that water supply to the best of their ability to make sure that it's not either too harsh or not harsh enough, or it's got too much chlorine or not enough chlorine. I mean, it's a pretty big deal towards keeping everything all in check. But most of those pumping, I'm going to call them a pumping recycling stations that's there to clean the water, most of those things is like no more than maybe 15, 20 foot high. And that's okay if you're up on top of a hillside. You ain't got nothing to worry about. But if there's any chance that a creek bed could come up, kind of like what happened in Kentucky or what happened in Waverly, Tennessee, if there's any chance that that system can become contaminated depending upon the water table level in that area, it may be that people need to work ahead of time towards trying to nip this in the bud. A stitch in time saves nine, and go ahead and add whatever that they need to add to that system. That way, if the water was to get out in that area, it wouldn't contaminate the water. Because, you know, people can live a long, long time without food. They really can. Once your body becomes adjusted and your stomach goes through that shrinking stage, you can go a long time without food. But water, you got to have water, or you will die, or you will get sick and wish that you was dead. You got to have water. If the water is contaminated, you have to decontaminate it. And if you don't have them pills that a lot of these Army surplus stores got, and maybe even some drug stores has, I don't know, but if you don't have them little capsules to purify your water, then you have to resort to other means. And don't drink it, because if you do, you'll get sick. Now, they're running into a water problem down in Mexico. They're running into a water problem pertaining to Lake Mead over in the Colorado River at the Hoover Dam. They're running into water problems out in Germany pertaining to the Rhine River and other places of the world. I was told that there's a big water reserve thing over in China that is very, very low. So these how do I want to word this? These mysterious problems that are going on with the world are not metaphors. It's not an hallucination. It's not people's exaggeration, but it's actually happening. And if we don't wake up with the alarms, this is going to catch so many people off guard, and there's going to be so much intense suffering, because even Christ said to flee into the mountains whenever you shall see these things starting to occur. And he didn't tell us to go up there because it was going to be more pleasant with the deer and the antelope and the little squirrels and the raccoons. He was telling us to flee into the high mountains, because if you're in a low-lying area, you're substitute of dying. It ain't no longer about flood insurance. Now it's about surviving. But you think about all them people just in this one town, in this one area here, that took on a lick, that now there's going to be businesses that ain't going to be able to open until maybe Thursday or Friday, maybe the weekend, because today's a holiday. And you think about all the cleanup that it's going to take toward ripping up carpet, cutting people's sheetrock neck high or waist high down, replacing some of the studding, some of the wiring, most people's air conditioner units pertaining to their heating and cooling system is on the ground. That will probably be ruined, because electronics and water don't go together. Kind of like your car's full of electronics. If your car ever becomes flooded, odds are it's ruined. And even if it does work, after you get all the water out of it, you clean the carpet, you set the carpet out in the sun, and you blow it all out real good, you're still going to have problems, because it's going to create rust around those terminals. And the next thing you know, you're going to have shorts in your vehicle that either blinker systems won't work, or it could actually cause a short to the degree that instead of it working like it should, it could actually cause a fire, and your vehicle could catch on fire. So whenever a vehicle floods, ordinarily, if you got any insurance on that vehicle, it's automatically a total. And I don't care what it is. It could be a Lamborghini. It could be a Rolls Royce. It could be $1 million car. Once it gets submerged underwater, odds are it's done. It's done. Because there's so many electronics, so many electrical wires in these automobiles, to where it could be astronomical on down the road, even if you think that you've dried it all out and cleaned it all up. Like I said, the next thing you know, condensation around the wires. Next thing you know, you'll have shorts. Next thing you know, you'll have sparks, and the next thing you know, you'll have fires.
Granted. Lindsay?
Okay, yeah, we see that steady stream of cars behind you. George Solis, thanks so much. DNA from a pair of sandals has led Memphis police to an arrest in the case of that missing kindergarten teacher and mom of two who was seen being forced into an SUV while out for a jog. Eliza Fletcher still has not been found, but police have charged a 38-year-old man with kidnapping and tampering with evidence. They say he's declined to give investigators Fletcher's location. NBC's Jesse Kirsch is following the story from Memphis. Jesse, what do we know so far about the suspect and about the investigation?
Yeah, well, Lindsay, about where I'm standing right now is the last place that police say that Eliza Fletcher was seen. That was on early Friday morning, authorities saying that she was on a morning jog, and according to an affidavit, a court document, she was on her run around here, and an SUV drove past, then stopped, waited for her to continue past the SUV, and authorities say at that point, that's when the suspect got out of the SUV, aggressively approached her, and there was a violent abduction, according to this court document. We are told now that the suspect, 38-year-old Cleotha Abston, is charged with especially aggravated kidnapping and with tampering with evidence. According to police, they are confirming to NBC News this same man pled guilty more than 20 years ago in a separate kidnapping case. He is being held on a $500,000 bond. We expect him to be making his first appearance before a judge tomorrow morning. And as that unfolds, police continue searching for Eliza Fletcher, something that is notable beyond the fact that there was this mysterious disappearance. And since she has vanished, she has not been seen in almost 4 days. For people who aren't familiar with Memphis, her family is well known here. She is the granddaughter of a hardware store chain magnate, so a hardware store in the Memphis area. Her grandfather established this very successful business, so her family is well known. She is described as a beloved teacher. She teaches junior kindergarten. She is said to be involved deeply with her church. There was a vigil over the weekend. So these are the details we are learning about this 34-year-old woman, again, a mother of 2 young children, and her family is pleading for her safe return. But again, we're looking at nearly 4 days since she was last seen, and the suspect, as you mentioned, according to police, is still not sharing where she is. And as we are talking right now, this desperate search continues. We've seen a helicopter in the sky in the area where the suspect was seen to have been, according to 2 witnesses. They reported seeing him wiping out the inside of a car with floor cleaner and washing his clothes in the sink and behaving in a strange manner. That also is from the affidavit. And so in that neighborhood, we saw police canvassing widely. There were dog teams, there were ATVs in the area, a boat was on standby, a helicopter in the air. So this has been going on throughout the weekend, now stretching into this week. And again, this mother still has not been heard from, according to authorities, since early Friday. And of course, we always talk about every hour counts. And another thing to be thinking about here is potentially the extent of her injuries. Hopefully she is still alive. It is believed, according to the affidavit, that the suspect would have been potentially cleaning up blood in that scene where he was described to have been cleaning out the inside of the vehicle. And it is likely, according to his affidavit, that she suffered serious injuries based on what was seen in surveillance images and the other evidence that police are looking at so far.
Jesse, what do we know about the suspect and his criminal history?
Yeah, we just talked about right there that he pled guilty, according to police, to a separate kidnapping incident several years ago. And perhaps that is how police had a DNA sample. They haven't given us further detail on how they had his DNA, but according to authorities, sandals that were left behind here were found by a random person, or at least someone, we don't know how random this was, but someone who came through here after the abduction. They saw the victim's phone and these sandals, according to police, got in touch with the family of the victim. The family of the victim then passes the sandals on to authorities, as well as the phone, according to this affidavit. And according to that court document, at that point, the DNA sample was taken. It matches to the suspect, Cleotha Abston, according to this affidavit, and that helped authorities zero in on him. They then find that his cell phone, the device attached to his cell phone number, was in this area at the time of the abduction. They find a partial plate off of surveillance video, according to this affidavit, and that lines up with a vehicle that was later found and appears to have been matching the vehicle seen in surveillance images here. And at that address where they find the vehicle, that's where they find the suspect, according to this affidavit, at which point the suspect apparently tried to flee, ultimately was apprehended, and hours later we know he was charged. And again, all of this is going on. He is in police custody. He has this criminal history, according to authorities, and we're told he still is not divulging this woman's location, even though he is being accused of being the person behind this abduction. And one other thing just to note, we were talking about time passing, every hour counting. Well, the gap between when this alleged abduction occurred and when the suspect was reported to be seen cleaning out the vehicle, we're talking about around a 2.5, 3 hour gap. So just imagine that is a time span that you got to think authorities are really trying to figure out what was going on in that time right now, Lindsay.
All right, Jesse Kirsch, thank you so much. Still ahead, as summer's unofficially over, kids are going back to school.
Sounds to me like TVI has got their hands full for right now.
Willing to overturn it. If you let Republicans control both the district court and all the...
Seems like TVI, it looks like TVI's got their hands full, and it also looks like Trump has been appointed finally, this special master request, which is probably a good thing. That way somebody can referee in making sure that the officials hadn't done something wrong versus stepping on Donald Trump's rights versus vice versa. So, I mean, it is what it is on Donald Trump. That's been a long-standing going situation. But the deal with the girl, I feel so sorry for her, because I've watched enough programs that if you don't find somebody within a 24-hour period, the odds of you finding that person goes down tremendously if you don't find that person in a 24-hour period. We need to pray for her, pray for our nation, pray for the world, pray for one another. In Jesus' name. Thank you for listening. Good luck to all of us as we end our program by saying God bless America, God bless our troops here on this Labor Day weekend 2022, and as we end by saying shalom.